Hello everyone, Brian here with Walnut Farm Bees. Can't believe here we are at the end of July, almost August. But I want to talk with you today on this very hot day. You can see I've got sweatband and also sun blocking thing on the back of my neck here to avoid being burned. Fortunately, I'm standing in the shade at the moment. I know I won't be later. But thinking again about what needs to be done at this time of year, what we should be doing, how we're going to ensure the success of our colonies going through the rest of the summer into the fall and over the winter till next year. So on the list of things that we need to be thinking about, we of course have pest management, thinking about the varroa mites primarily, a little bit about wax moths, hive beetles, ants, but the dominant one there is the varroa mites as far as what up here in Pennsylvania might doom our colonies. And most of my colonies at this time of year were last treated in some way for mites organically back in early December. And because of watching how things go and the way mites were managed during the year, that's possible. Now, there's a lot of variables. I've talked to people recently who have mite counts of in the 40s in their hives. Some people have colonies that only have 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. All that we would consider, oh, well, that's pretty decent, that's okay. So I want to talk with you about that, and then we'll talk a little bit later about, again, some treatment options and just some more clarification on those options, because more often than not, someone might say, well, I treated for mites, but they still died over the winter, so it wasn't related to mites. But I hear way too often people treating incorrectly for mites. So we'll step into the farm shop later and go over that. But I'm going to do an alcohol wash. You can use Dawn dish detergent solution. Randy Oliver with Scientific Beekeeping has the recipe for that on his website. I still have quite a bit. I got a case of this during the pandemic when it was hard to get, so I'm still working my way through that, and it's super convenient. I don't have to mix this up the day before. You can do what's known as a sugar roll as well to check for mites. It's not as accurate, so if you do that, I would just increase the number that you get to assume there's more mites than what you're finding in that wash. And as always, I think it's possible that even with an alcohol wash, you're not finding the exact number. You're getting a general idea. I always tend to think a little more pessimistically versus on the result versus optimistic, leaning towards the high side. One thing to note is that when we do the alcohol wash, we use a half cup of bees, which is 300 bees, and a colony that's got 40,000 bees, most of which during the summer live 6 to 8 weeks. That's not a concern when you're going to save the rest of those bees for next year. So I know it's hard to do, and I don't love it, but it's quite necessary if you want to get a good handle on things. Often discussed is, well, I'm not going to check, I'm just going to treat my bees, and I totally get that, and especially if you're a first-year beekeeper, I totally get that as well. Why do I do it? Primarily so that I can know where things stand to determine when and with what I will treat for mites, and then whether or not what I'm doing is working. So at the very minimum, if you can check them in July, like around now or a little bit earlier, and then check them in late August or early September to see how things went. At a minimum, that would be very helpful, and it's not super difficult to do. You can get accustomed to doing it once you've done it a few times. For me, I find helpful a little wash basin. Some people will just scrape off the comb into the cup. I use kind of a 3-step approach because I'm worried about the queen. If you spot the queen right away, no worries. You can confidently do a mite wash. We obviously don't want to get her in the mite wash. But often I can't spot the queen or just don't that particular day, or because of how many mite washes I'm doing, I just don't do that. So I will find a frame, ideally that has a mix of brood, so capped brood, larvae, eggs, where the nurse bees are, who are most likely to have the mites on them that are waiting to get into that brood. I'll shake that frame into this basin after looking at the frame carefully for my queen, but as you know, you can miss the queen. I double check, I triple check, I think I don't see her, and then I shake it into the basin. I look in the basin to see if I can see her in there. So it's my second chance to look for her. And I give it a minute to let foragers and drones fly off because they're less likely to have the mites on them. And then I take my half cup of bees, again a chance to look for the queen, before I put it into the mite wash container, and then agitate very vigorously for a minute to figure out how many mites in a sample of 300. So technically speaking, what is still the official threshold for mites is 3%, which would be 9 mites in a count. But over the years, the mites are carrying more viruses, bacteria, and the bees can't handle as high a load of mites. So I'm looking personally at, keeping at 1% or better. At this time of year, if I know there's a treatment that's going to be upcoming, and like if you're doing honey, of course you don't want to be treating then, even though there's some approved treatments for when honey is on. I prefer not to do that. I also lean towards, we'll talk about the treatment options later, but I personally use the organic ones. Again, your choice if you want to use one of the synthetic chemical treatments like Amitraz, which is called Apivar commercially. That's your choice. I'll talk about the pros and cons of those. So let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so we're going to start in the back here today with some of these double deeps. And we did give them some new frames to draw out, which you'll probably notice. Probably should have brought the smoker over because of the heat and humidity here today. We have calm bees, but the hotter it gets and the more humid it gets, the more irritated everybody gets. And they're drawing out some comb real nice there. We're going to go to the bottom. Move this one off to the side. Look for a frame with mixed brood on it. Being careful to spot for a queen. A lot of nectar and pollen on there. Bee bread. A couple of new frames that we stuck in here to give them something to do since we're done with honey here. They're just starting to draw this out. Cap brood. Checking for the status of the queen. Did not see eggs yet. And I definitely want to see eggs. This is last year's queen. You don't have to requeen every year, but another good thing to do at this time of year is to evaluate your queen. and particularly if she's, either a new queen or last year's queen. A queen with a poor laying pattern isn't suddenly going to improve going into the rest of the summer into late fall. Or a colony that you don't like the temperament, it's not going to suddenly improve if it's been bad all year. So it's a good time to make a call on, do I want to replace the queen, or is she doing fantastic? And do have eggs. This would actually be a decent frame to test. So I'm going to double check and triple check. Let's see. And I do not see her. Alright. Alright, we're going to give this a good shake. Just about a half cup or more in there. Till we shake them into the corner. Letting those foragers fly off. Get my half cup. While I let them fly off, my rubbing alcohol. Pouring it up to the line here in this Mite check container. Couple styles of these. This is called the Easy Check. Saracel makes Varroa Check, which is a real nice one as well. And comes with a half cup measuring. I easily got a half cup in there. A good half cup. Put them in there. Get the top on. Okay. Rest of the bees back in the colony. Put our frames back in after we give this a quick shake. Get the body on, hive body on. And get the second deep on. Okay. Vigorous rotation to agitate these bees. I'm going to make sure that we dislodge any mites that were probably on the underside of the bee. If you look in a colony and you see mites on top of bees, it's probably a really bad infestation. Pretty far gone at that point. Usually you don't see them visibly on top of the bees. On the underside typically. They're trying to hitch a ride there to get into those cells where the larva is before it's capped, so they can reproduce. Okay, so just kind of do a count in my head as I'm working through this, making sure I do a really good agitation of this sample of bees. At least a minute. going more than a minute, not a problem. Just make sure you get a really good agitation in there for a minute. You want to have as accurate a count as possible. One mite so far, which is pretty darn good. I just want to make sure that I agitate it properly. Sometimes that's the reason why you think you have a good mite count, but no, I still have a count of one mite. And I don't know if we can see this or not on the camera. Kind of floating down right there. There's the one mite. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll continue do mite checks this location. Things are gonna vary. Maybe I'll find a 0. Maybe I'll find a 10. Who knows? And I'll try to figure out overall what the level is at. And once a particular yard location is at a threshold where I'm ready to do something about it, this would be a good time of year to do something about it. At that point, the whole location will get treated, not just those individual hives, because they do, they spread things back and forth, visit a lot of the same sources. And as it get later in the year, they rot from each other a little bit too. That's always possible. So, big thing to be thinking about this time of year. Managing my mites, looking at the queen's laying pattern. How's she doing? Am I seeing eggs? Is she laying them consistently, or is they just very scattered throughout? How's the nutrition level? I don't, unless I have a super light colony, which I probably don't, I don't want to be feeding really right now. If I'm still drawing a little comb, some very light syrup is okay until they've drawn that comb, but you don't want to overfeed at this time of year particularly, because many places there's still a little bit of nectar coming in, so they can get that nectar. And if they do get another source of nectar, like somewhat of a fall flow coming in, they can pack out too full too early where the queen doesn't have space to lay, and essentially is shutting down for the fall. I don't really want that to happen until maybe starting late September, at least in south central PA. I want to give her as much time as possible to keep a really nice sized brood nest in here, so we have plenty of bees going into the fall. Okay, so this time of year, as I mentioned, got to think about pest management. As far as small hive beetles, not as much of a concern up north with a healthy hive, but be cautious. If you use pollen patties to keep protein going through late summer, use just a tiny piece and remove it if you start to see small hive beetles laying in there. Wax moths are not usually an issue for a strong, healthy colony. As you store your honey supers, you may need to take precautions related to wax moths there. If you only have a few, either freezing them and putting them sealed tight somewhere, or some people will leave it open to light and air to avoid that. If you only have honey in those supers and the bees haven't stored much pollen or haven't been used for brood, it tends to be less likely that you'll get wax moths, because the wax moths are looking for really protein sources like you would find in the pollen and in the brood areas. The other issue, of course, being the mites and we just did a mite check, and if you reach the point where it's time to do something about that, it really varies on your bees, how they started off in the spring, how they came through the winter, your location, if there's heavy mite pressure around you, the genetics of the bees, a lot of different factors there. Our bees that haven't been treated since last December, and keeping in mind, take this for what it's worth, because most of our bees are from VSH type of lines, so they tend to either have fewer mites in a mite check or can handle it a little bit better or respond better when doing organic treatments. So our on-treated colonies range from 3 to 6 mites when we do a check right now, which is 1 to 2% infestation, which yes, you would want to do something about that. If I did nothing about that because of the mite pressure around my locations, by the end of the year, those colonies could be dead. So I'll have to think about treating those. Options for treating, and again, we only use organic treatments, and especially my concern would be honey producing colonies. Everyone has a different preference, but our preference is to use the organic treatments. The only synthetic chemical treatment still really being used is this one, Apivar, which this year now also comes in a gel format as well. The chemical is Amitraz. It is effective when used properly, but it is a synthetic chemical. Recommendations are don't do it when you're collecting honey. If you use this before collecting honey, you need to wait a couple weeks in between, so this does not taint your honey. These strips for every brood chamber, whether 8 or 10 frame, I guess they say for every 5 frames of bees, so an 8 frame would be treated like a 10 frame. You're going to use one of these strips and hang it down in between where the brood is, and that's really important for this. People who complain that this does not work are not using it properly. So a couple of things about this product. One is it's most effective early spring before the honey season or going into fall, where the bees are more in a cluster and the brood tends to stay more concentrated in one area, because this is a contact-based treatment. So when you're using this, you want to make sure these strips are centered where the brood is, and according to the manufacturer, you're going to want to move them around during the treatment to where the brood is for a length of 6 to 8 weeks, no longer than 8 weeks. Also, when you're checking these strips, you're going to take the propolis or wax and make sure you scrape it off them again, otherwise these are not effective. So that's the synthetic one, Apivar. Another popular treatment these days, this is from a company, AP Bioxyl, the only approved legal source of oxalic acid. It's very popular because it is organic and naturally occurring. This is approved for use when honey supers are on. Again, I typically try not to do anything when honey supers are on. I don't want my honey in contact with anything really. And to that point, if you are kind of wrestling over what I'm going to treat my bees with, or how I'm going to take care of my bees, because my focus is so heavily on I still want to get honey, you're making a mistake. Do not be so focused on getting honey as long as possible during the summer that you skip or delay urgent issues with your bees. Always stop collecting honey if the bees need to be taken care of, if mites need to be taken care of. So oxalic acid can be administered in a couple of ways. One being, I can mix up some sugar syrup with the correct weight in grams. It has the directions on the package for an oxalic acid dribble. It'll go in a syringe, and I'll put 5 milliliters down each seam of bees. And again, this works best. Really either early in the year or late in the year. That's a great option for a after Thanksgiving treatment. No matter what you do, I always recommend doing a treatment late in the year after pretty much most of the brood is gone. That's the cleanup treatment to account for all of the crashing colonies around you that may not even be your own bees. The other option is what's called oxalic acid vapor, or OAV, where you'll use some type of a vaporizer tool. Here's an example of one. A number of different options these days, including battery operated options. Always wear an organic chemical respirator when you're doing this. Don't fool around with this. Don't go with a lesser quality respirator. Super important to do that. So that will go by numbers of size of the colony, brood chamber, as far as how many grams of oxalic acid you use when you're vaporizing. And you can actually do that as many times as you want versus the dribble, which is recommended maybe once every 6 months. They actually ingest that. This, again, like the dribble, is only going to catch mites that are outside of the cap brood. So traditionally it has made it a poor choice for during the summer when you have a lot of cap brood. But if you do not have a super high infestation rate, you can use this in the summer, and primarily I would recommend it if you have really easy access to your bees. Any of my bee yards that are not close by, that I don't want to visit every few days, this is not a good summer treatment. I only do this after Thanksgiving for those locations. But I do have a mating yard and some Slovenian hives that are most conveniently treated with oxalic acid vapor. So for those locations, the key is to treat close enough together over a long enough period of time. So what I found out ideally is if the mite levels are not out of control, when I'm done with my hunting, which down in South Central PA is usually late June, shortly after, either late June, early July, I can start a treatment. After knowing my mite count, I can start a treatment of roughly every 3 days, 6 times. 5 being on the high side, that's getting a little bit long. Ideally every 3 to 4 days. Much longer than that, like the once a week, may not catch everything. So after that's done, and really again, that's only, it's 3 weeks essentially of length of time for treatment. Those bees treated that way, if I test them and monitor what's going on, check them again as we get into late July, August. If the mite counts are low, I'll wait again and do the same thing at the beginning of September. Every 3 to 4 days, 6 times. And then those are usually good until late season, after Thanksgiving, early December treatment. So to also prove that works, I've tested my colonies, and again, on my untreated colonies are anywhere from 3 to 6 mites in the mite counts. In the yard where it gets oxalic acid, which has finished its first treatment for the summer, and again is done with honey, the mite counts are averaging 0.5, anywhere from 0 to 1, more zeros than 1. So it does work using that kind of approach. Now, should mention oxalic acid, also Apivar. Note that these are not fast treatments. They take a while to take effect. So if you have a sky-high mite count, it's not going to immediately turn it around. That's also the risk of waiting too late in the season to address your mites. It's not just I'm removing mites from the colony. The mites issue is related to the viruses and bacteria. That does not immediately leave. I want almost no viruses and bacteria in my colonies by September, because by mid-September they're raising winter bees, and I do not want those to be unhealthy bees that are raising my winter bees. Another product that does work, you can use it when honey supers are on, if necessary, if the supers are on, and it is organic. It's a pretty harsh treatment as far as the bees are concerned. It's formic acid. This is Formic Pro. It's 2 pads. You can go with an approach of 1 pad at a time. Over a period of time, 1 strip for 10 days, second strip for another 10 days is the recommendation. Or you can do 2 strips for 14 days, which is usually what I do. Caution here is there's a temperature threshold on this. I want to make sure that it's not over 85. My personal preference is I want the first 3 days to be 80 or less. It can be really tough to find, especially in the summer. Our northern colonies, it's easier to find that. These, if I'm using a double brood system, will go between the two boxes, a single brood right over that brood chamber. And these will be put on right over the brood area for that period of time. And quite effective since it does penetrate the capped brood. There is some risk, it will kill some brood, and there is some risk of affecting your queen, and this has always been the worry with this product. I will say a couple of things. One is make sure the product is in date. The date is always listed on the product. If it's out of date, what happens is there's the paper wrapping that kind of, I guess it's a wax paper or something similar wrapping that surrounds the product when you put these patties on the colony, and it gets too saturated over time, and I think the vapors will release too quickly. So make sure it's in date. Also, when I put this on, I always open it up, ready to put on, set it somewhere on top of another hive, not in a hive, just maybe on top of a lid or something like that, for a couple of minutes before I put it in the colony. It seems like that initial blast or off-gassing is what maybe is affecting these colonies. And for what it's worth, I've never seen a really good, healthy queen get killed by this stuff. Also, another great product for this time of year. Again, you got to stop doing honey if you're going to use this. This is organic, essential oils, thyme-based product, very concentrated gel, but it does have a strong odor, so it would taint your honey in that way. So make sure you're done with honey before you use this. This comes in a bulk container where you can put it on top of a card if you're doing a lot of colonies. Single colonies, you can use the trays. If your temperatures aren't much over 80, you can follow the typical directions, which is one tray of 150 milliliter, I believe it is. Just tell you what that is. It's a milliliter dose, followed by a second one. First one goes on for 2 weeks. Second one goes on for 4 weeks. So again, this time of year, that's kind of ideal. That takes me up into September, which is covering a really heavy mite time of year. And again, I would always follow it up with the oxalic acid after Thanksgiving. However, we're getting to some really hot temperatures, and anytime the temperature during the day is over 77, you can use this product in a different way according to the manufacturer. And that is, you can cut the dose in half, and instead of every couple of weeks, you can treat them every week. So basically, take half of this gel out, put it in a baggie or something like that, put half in for a week, put the second half in for a week, put half in for a week, put the second half in for a week. Again, it'll still take you up through September, and you don't run the risk of it being too strong because of the temperatures this time of year. Recommendation is to do this on top of your brood chambers using some kind of a shim, so the bees can get up there and bring it down through the colony and out the entrance. Entrance does not have to be, cannot be close during this time. Do not shut off the entrance like you would with an oxalic acid treatment. And with the formic product, it has to be wide open, not even an entrance reducer for that product. This is incredibly effective. This will bring a high mite count down. Again, the key is not waiting too late in the year. The products that I used outside there's the Mite Check, Easy Check that I was using. Here's a newer product which I like because they include the half cup scoop from Ceracell. Is the Varroa Mite test bottle. Recommend getting comfortable with checking for mites in that way. So I hope you found this to be helpful. Again, this time of year, watch that you have a laying queen. Look for eggs when you inspect your colony. Look at the pattern. There's still time to correct it by replacing that queen yet this year if necessary. Make sure they have enough food, but not too much that the queen cannot lay. Make sure they have ample pollen and protein so that that she continues to lay, and brood nest continues to be filled until you get into late September. And manage your mites, know what your mite count is, stop doing honey if that's what's keeping you from taking care of the mites. I hope you enjoy your summer, and we can still be found here at the farm shop on Fridays from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. or by appointment.